WNST all across the Pacific Northwest, and I come home to find a Baltimore Oriole team sort of teetering here at first place. Sort of a bad weekend, first bad weekend of the season in time for the Preakness and the good weather. This guy has been chasing baseball as long as I've known him. He does a lot of work at the Olympics down at the Washington Post, but is back on the baseball beat. As Bono would sing, Dave Sheinin, a sort of homecoming for you, I would think, right? Dave Sheinin can be found out at the Washington Post as well as out on Twitter at Dave Sheinin. That's SESHEININ. And he also lives here in Baltimore, even though it says Washington Post. I try to get that in there for you, Dave. But back in these baseball clubhouses, from a career perspective, you did this for a long time, many years ago. It's the basis of our friendship. But you were off the baseball beat for a while. Now you're back in. Maybe some observations about that at this point in your life.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's been an interesting opportunity to compare what the game is like now versus what it was when I was covering it last time on a daily basis, which was 2011, I guess. And the main things that have changed, I think, are the front offices now are almost exclusively, with a few exceptions, very analytics based. A lot of Ivy Leaguers in the game, and it used to be just a handful of those types of teams in 2011. So that's taken over the game in a much more profound way. Pitching is so deep, and there's so many hard throwers. It's almost an average guy now throws 97. You used to have, maybe 2 or 3 guys in every bullpen who could do that, and now it's everybody. And some of the technological advances with replay and things like that have certainly altered the game as well. The games are longer, which I think is, obviously a focus of Commissioner Manfred right now, reducing that. So, yeah, the game has changed a lot in just a short amount of time, but, maybe in very subtle ways that aren't reflected to the casual viewer.
Well, I'm reading Keith Law's book on smart baseball. I did not take it on the trip with me. I probably should have, just to finger through it a little bit, and the different stats and the wars and the advanced saber. And I don't know whether that is going to make this more fun or less fun for me. I know that most people, they don't analyze who they vote for in this country, let alone, the war of, Caleb Joseph, for crying out loud. But the statistical part of this is and Luke and I talk about this all the time, you can do as deep a dive as you want to take that's beyond the back of a bubblegum card, like when you and I were growing up and saying, well, this is an ERA, this is, these are hits and stats and RBIs and whatever, that the advanced part of this can really befuddle fans, I think, as to why teams do what they do. I think it's very obvious when you watch baseball now, all of the shifting going on defensively is something that used to be more in our era. Cal Ripken had some sort of file cabinet in the left side of his brain and would just say, hey, maybe you should shade over a little bit there, Brady or Mike Devereaux. It's a lot different than that now. And if the teams aren't paying attention to that data, they're probably not doing themselves a favor at this point, right?
Yeah, I think that's true. But I think, what happens is that with every team now getting pretty sophisticated data analysts, on board, it's harder than ever to find an edge, to find that market inefficiency that so famously, the Oakland A's exploited, that led to the Moneyball book and everything else. So, I mean, it's just when everybody has those types of people and those types of philosophies, it's harder than ever to find, to exploit an inefficiency. And I think that's, we don't even know where this is all going. I mean, right now, if you ask me what is, the new vanguard in analytics and the new edge that teams are looking at, and I would say that it's probably trying to keep pitchers healthy. A lot of innovation and stuff is going on the medical side of baseball. If you could ever figure out a way to keep pitchers' arms from falling apart, you'd rule the world in baseball. I don't know that it's possible, but I do, suspect that, smart teams can figure out a way to do it better than others. And, that was Jeff Passan's fabulous book from a year or two ago called The Arm that was all about, why are pitchers breaking down so frequently, the elbow surgery. and what can be done about it. And there's not a hard and fast answer, but I do think that's a fascinating area of exploration.
Well, it is we've all thrown a baseball, and we all know what that does to your shoulder, to your wrist, to your forearm, to your elbow, the Tommy John, the ulnars, we hear about all of that stuff. And I guess there have been so many different philosophies. I mean, every time I bring Leo Mazzoni on, he swears they're all doing it wrong, and it's kind of hard to argue with him, except that he's living on a farm on a lake down in South Carolina, and he's not in a science book. He just did this for 50 years. And, the whole Tom House thing and whether guys should be throwing more or less, and then you see Jim Palmer's stats and see these, 22 complete games in a season and all that. And a lot of these guys just trying to get to the fifth inning and hold on, right?
Yeah, I mean, anymore, the game has become much more of a bullpen game. You used to want your starter to go 7 or 8 innings or 9 innings, and nowadays, if you get 6 out of them, you're thrilled, and you've got a 7th-inning guy who's throwing 97 and an 8th-inning guy who's throwing 99, and you've got a 9th-inning guy who's throwing 100. So no one's so concerned anymore about getting starting. And if you're if you're a really good lineup, you used to want to try to wear down the starting pitcher and get him out of the game. Nowadays, I'm not sure you want to do that anymore. You'd rather see that starting pitcher in the game in the 6th or 7th inning than you would the kind of guys they have in the bullpen now. So that part of the game is changing.
Dave Scheiner joining us here talking all things baseball. He is back on the baseball beat at the Washington Post. You can follow him at Dave Scheiner out on Twitter as well. All right, and then there are the Orioles, right? We spend the whole offseason talking about, how they don't have any pitching, how they only have boppers, they're station to station. And lo and behold, they've gotten off to this incredible start and not really through any means that maybe we would have predicted, right? I mean, offensively, they've been nothing special. Starting pitching, the fact that Miley has survived all this and Bundy has come on to become at least the beginning part of what we would consider to be an ace around here. Gosman can't figure it out right now. It's been a box of chocolates all the way around, including Ubaldo Jimenez, who it's late May and they're still giving him the ball. I'm sort of shocked by that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, I swear it happens every year. If you look at the Orioles on paper, you just can't figure out how they're doing what they're doing. I mean, they don't even have Zach Britton, who was probably their most valuable player, perhaps other than Machado last year. A crucial part of the that bullpen. I mean, Mark Trumbo hasn't hit. Jones hasn't hit that much. Chris Davis hasn't really gotten untracked the way. You look up and down their lineup. I mean, Manny Machado even is hitting 220 or something. I don't know. You wonder how they do it. And I think it has to speak to, on a certain level, this 5-year run here they've had, 6-year run. It has to speak to the brilliance of Buck Showalter. I mean, that has to be a massive part of this equation. I mean, I do like this team, and I think that the great thing about this team is that there's upside now in Gosman, who hasn't been anywhere near. I mean, who's actually been kind of a disaster. But between Gosman and Bundy, there's an upside here that they haven't had, which is the potential to have a couple of, number 1, number 2 type of starting pitchers in the rotation, which they just have not had for the past 4 or 5 years while they've been playing great baseball.
Well, you mentioned arms and problems. I mean, Bundy would be the king of this, and I know they have Strasburg down in D.C., who you've seen as well. But, this emergence of Dylan Bundy, I'm kind of shocked by it, to be honest with you. I mean, I have been, like you, around this thing for 25 years, and you hear about all these, it was going to be Rocky Coppinger, it was going to be Jimmy Haynes, it was going to be Brian Mattis, it was going to be Jake Arrieta at one point. But with Dylan Bundy, I heard more about him for 5 years for a guy that had only thrown 2/3 of an inning of pitching in the major leagues before last year. He'd had more surgeries and more time off than he'd had time in. And lo and behold, whatever they've done with him, whatever that kid's makeup is about, this has been as impressive a thing as it's Messina-like, isn't it? I mean, having an ERA toiling around 2 as we're getting up on Preakness. And every time he takes the ball, I don't want to call it Fernando Mania, but when he's pitching, I want to watch him pitch on Thursday.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a long way to go before we reach anything approaching Messina level. We're talking about eight starts right now that he's had this year. So, I want to see this in the summertime. I want to see it deep into August, September. There's going to be there's going to come a time when the Orioles are dealing with some questions about innings limits with Bundy. I mean, obviously, like you said, this is a guy who's pitched very little, in the last 5 years with all the injuries. Last year he had about 110 innings. How far are you going to extend him? Are you going to let this guy go 200 innings and go 220 innings if you wind up pitching in October? I need to see more from Bundy before I'm going to anoint him even an ace for this staff. But like you said, there's great things here. It's amazing to see, and I think it speaks to his level of perseverance, because as you named all those guys who flamed out, Bundy could have easily packed this thing in and said, "I'm never going to make it. There's too many setbacks," and he kept going, and here he is finally arriving. And you know what? He's still only 24 years old, so he's got a long career ahead of him.
The Britton thing really throws everything into arrears for Buck and for what he wants to do and the way they want to manage and the way they want to use Norfolk and the way they want to use spot starters and rain days and doubleheaders and all the nonsense, extra inning games, everything that's going to happen here. As you see it, I don't know how they're going to survive this unless he comes back, right? I don't like the way the bullpen looks here the last couple of weeks. And I would say over the weekend, it sort of caught up to him a little bit, right?
Yeah, it really did. I mean, everything slots into place really well when Zach Britton is there locking down the ninth inning. You've got great eighth inning guys. You've got your situational lefties. You've got great seventh inning guys. The bullpen just looks really, really solid when Zach Britton is back there anchoring it. And without him there, everything is thrown off. And yeah, I mean, you saw it come back and bite them. Stuff like what Britton is dealing with now, it's not unusual for something really bad to start out like this. I mean, it always starts out as a forearm and then it ends up being something really bad, and all of a sudden they're under the knife. I have no knowledge that that's what's going on with Britton. But you've got to be really concerned if you're the Orioles about this, and you have to hope that when he does come back that the rest did what it's supposed to do, because I don't think they can survive this season without Zach Britton back there.
Well, then there's Tillman, and I would have said the same thing back in February and March. I think the last time we talked was in early spring training, maybe 2 months ago, 3 months ago now. And the thought of them not having Tillman on opening day, the thought of the mystery of when he's going to come back, I'm very, very encouraged. Not only he came back in May, but came back with the team in first place. And, I don't expect him 7 2/3 out there, every fifth day. But having him back is a shot in the arm while you lose Britton and while the offense hasn't been good. I'm very encouraged by the fact that Tillman's taking the ball every fifth day.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I mean, it's just depth. I mean, it's another quality major league starting pitcher in a rotation where, you're not having to go out there and throw, a Tyler Wilson or Alec Asher, even though, Asher especially has been pretty good. You just add depth to that rotation. If like we said, if Bundy and Goffman have the potential to be number 1, 2 type of guys, and Miley holds his own, and I mean that ends up all of a sudden looking like a pretty good big league rotation, which the Orioles in the last few years have sort of won despite their starting pitching. This could actually be a strength of the team if things fall into place, and that's a big if.
Dave Sheinin covered all things baseball, specifically Orioles baseball, here in Baltimore for the Washington Post. You can follow his journey out at WashingtonPost.com, as well as at Dave Sheinin out on Twitter. And then let me get to the bats here. This was the one part we didn't question, right? We thought they would hit the baseball. We thought they'd hit a lot of home runs. We thought they'd drive in runs. We knew they'd be more station to station. At some point, these averages are going to pick up. At some point, the on-base percentage is going to pick up. But for them to have been as good as they've been, 11, 12 games over 500, with this offense being where it is, where no one is stepping up and having anything like a career year, maybe Seth Smith, maybe Trey Mancini, and, their at-bats have been limited, and they've been pretty good. Scope's been great. The rest of this, we're sort of waiting, and I don't know what we're waiting on. I mean, at some point, Chris Davis would straighten this thing out, and we'll start to see that kind of power we expect from Trumbo.
Yeah.
But Machado it's starting to become concerning, and I think J.J. Hardy from the get-go, I've always been concerned about where the ledge is for a guy like him in his career.
That was exactly what I was going to say. I think they have a real issue here with Hardy. You've always sort of accepted some subpar offense from him in exchange for that tremendous glove and a clutch hit or two in the course of a season that's going to win you a couple of games. But right now, I mean, it's almost like the pitcher hitting down there. He's just giving you nothing offensively right now, and you have to wonder how much longer they can abide by that, especially when you have Machado, who still fancies himself as a shortstop. You have that option to move him, and you have ways to plug a hole there if you start benching Hardy, which I don't I could see that happening, or at least some questions and some options in the next few weeks if this keeps up. But I think with the rest of the guys, for the most part, you look at track records. I don't think there's any worry whatsoever about Manny Machado. I don't think there's worry about Mark Trumbo. Davis, same thing. I mean, I think these guys are going to hit. But it's Hardy, at 34, 35 years old, clearly on a downhill trajectory. I think that's where you have a real concern if you're the Orioles.
We talk about the level of urgency with the Capitals team that I chased around for a couple weeks. And, I still think most people believe the Wizards weren't going to win the championship this year. With the Orioles, I sense a different sense of urgency here this year. And I also sense a different level of expectation. Dave, no one expects the Orioles to win the World Series. Everyone expected the Capitals to either fold or win, and based on where they were. The Machado thing, we're getting toward the end here, right? I mean, he could have 700 bats left as an Oriole player at this point. He's hitting 220. He's struggling. The position thing, as you brought up, will be brought into question. And then there's who's going to pay him all this money. Bryce Harper had some problems last year. He's had a bounce back this year. Trout's going through this as well. The Orioles, as we know them, this is a limited time offer right now. Probably a limited time offer for Buck behind the bench as well as Dan Duquette. A lot's going to happen here in the next 15, 16 months, right?
Yeah, it's true. I do think that there is a pretty well-defined window here of this year and next before, Machado, Jones, and Britton all hit free agency at the same time after 2018. So there is pretty much a defined window, and I think, a lot of times I would encourage people not to look at it like that because there's always somebody coming along in the minor leagues or they're going to sign somebody. But with this franchise, there's not a whole lot coming at the upper levels of the minor leagues, and they're not going to sign the big-time free agents. They're not going to make a big international signing. So in this case, I think the window cliche actually applies because it's very hard to see how this team is going to be as competitive as they are right now in 2019 and beyond. There should be a sense of urgency with this franchise right now.
Well, Trey Mancini has twice the amount of RBIs as Chris Davis and half the amount of at-bats, right? So, at some point, time will and Buck will have to massage this thing. But someone's going to step up here and be a leader. Adam Jones and the problems that he had in Boston a couple weeks ago and the problems the team has had with beanballs and all of that, there's been a lot of drama away from just how are we going to win tonight's ball game in addition to the injuries. This has been a treacherous 6 weeks for them to have been playing 700 ball. I'm very, very impressed by the start they've gotten off to. But now the expectations raise a little bit, as should the expectations of everybody in this offense to be better.
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I mean. I still think that there's an upside here that they haven't even played their best because their closer's been out, their starting catcher has been out, their presumed top starting pitcher Gossman has been nowhere near what he's capable of. They've played incredible baseball, but I still think that there's another level that they are capable of going to, and that's what's kind of exciting about this team for the rest of the year.
Dave Shinan covering baseball, back on the beat off after spending time in Sochi and trying to figure out how to make toilets flush and water run and all that stuff. He's at the Washington Post. You can also follow him at Dave Shinan out on Twitter. Let's get around baseball a little bit here. Obviously, you've spent a lot of time with the Nationals as well, and you are the national baseball writer there. Where are the Nationals at this point? This feels like a cruise control thing, right? Like, nobody in that division's going to play 500 ball this year. I think that's pretty obvious. That they're going to be in some level of coast, and they got to get that bullpen cleaned up. And much like for the Capitals and much like for, any of these teams, they're going to be judged in October because I'm already giving them the fact that, they're going to print playoff tickets down in D.C. this year.
Well, they are 8 games up on the Mets already, and the Mets are a complete train wreck. So I think there's a lot of validity there to what you said. I mean, obviously they can't just assume that they're going to be in October and just fast forward to there.
But there's no other team that can say that, though. There's a different thing when every other team is going to have to fight, including the Cubs, who are in 4th place all of a sudden and don't look like geniuses. I feel like they could play 500 ball the rest of the way and win 91, 92 games and scuffle a little bit, and then it's going to come down to 5 days in October for them. No one else is going to have that kind of trip this year, I don't think.
Well, that's all true. I mean, their lineup is absolutely amazing. Buck Showalter was talking about just the depth of the Nationals lineup and just how there's no escape hatch in that lineup. There's no bailout. It's so deep, 1 through 8. The bullpen is more than just an issue for them. I think it's a massive problem right now. They've cycled through 3 or 4 different guys trying to close games. They didn't have it settled really coming out of spring training, and they don't have it settled now. And it's been quite a disaster. And I think you're getting to a point where it's not playing very well in the clubhouse. It's a very veteran clubhouse who has the attitude of, look, we're doing our part. And you guys, meaning the front office, you need to fix this 9th inning and not have our season torpedoed by a bad bullpen. Right now, that bullpen there's no form or function to it whatsoever. I think they're in huge need of a closer.
Well, and they're going to get that done, right? I mean, they're going to be,
you would think,
the first ones out in the marketplace to say, if we get the bullpen fixed, we can have a parade here in October. If we don't, we can't. And much like a lot of these other teams, I mean, their window's closing too for where Jason Worth is in his career, what's going to happen with Bryce Harper, whether Strasburg's arm's going to fall off today, tomorrow, or next week. They have all those questions as well. But I feel like there's more pressure on that organization there than there is in Baltimore on the Orioles to actually win because of the disappointments they've had there in October, and maybe even the civic temperature of how awful the Redskins are, how the Capitals always disappoint, how the Wizards haven't gotten there. The Nationals become the hope for that city, I think.
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, that's true. I mean, there's huge expectations. I don't see their window being as closing in the same sense that the Orioles are, just because I feel like the Nationals have a little bit more coming from the farm system, and I think that they have a possible franchise player to replace Bryce Harper already on board in Trey Turner, the shortstop, who's only 24 years old and was a Rookie of the Year candidate last year. And he's not going to produce like Bryce Harper. He's a different type of player, but I do think he's someone who you could call a franchise player in the future. So I think they're in a little bit better shape long term. But to speak to the expectations, absolutely, man. They're huge expectations there. This is a team that has been viewed all along as being a World Series contender. They're playing out of their minds right now, other than the bullpen. And it's a type of team that will go out and spend $200 million on a starting pitcher, free agent like Max Scherzer. So, yeah, they have huge, enormous expectations in Washington, and that's exactly why they cannot let the whole thing be torpedoed by a bad bullpen.
Probably should have had you on last week, Dave, but you've been at this thing from the beginning. You've lived here in Baltimore throughout all of this mess with Angelos from the beginning to now. Are you shocked that the Nationals have been as good as they've been? Because I would have said coming off the boat from Montreal when they showed up and played at RFK, I would have always believed that at some point they would have had more money because of the market size, because of the transient nature, because of where they put the ballpark, where tourists could get to it down there in D.C. But I am really blown away by what a quality franchise they've been, from selling tickets to fighting with Angelos to getting great players and getting them on the field and dealing with their demons with Matt Williams and still getting back up and playing 650 ball again with a new manager and a recycled manager as well in Dusty Baker. They've really pushed a lot of the right buttons when you think about over the last decade of all the things that could have become the Washington Senators or Nationals. And, for a century they were no good. Now they get this team back. They've been really top of the class over the last decade in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things have happened there. Number one, it has taken 10 years to get to this level since they moved to Washington. We're now 13 years into this thing. It took a solid 10 years to get it into really good shape. But they've sort of invented in a way the let's lose 100 games and get the draft picks. It's kind of the formula that the Cubs undertook when Theo Epstein got there, and the Astros did, and it's worked. And the Nationals got very lucky that the 2 years that they picked number one overall in the draft, they had Steven Strasburg and Bryce Harper in back-to-back years. So they got a franchise pitcher, and say what you will about Strasburg and the injuries and the elbow surgery, but he's been a pretty good pitcher since he's been back. And Bryce Harper has been an MVP once already at age 24. So, they lucked into that to a certain extent. And they also have, I think, a very, very good, shrewd general manager in Mike Rizzo, who has made a series of amazing trades, including, like I was talking about earlier, Trey Turner. It's just they've been run pretty well. It's a well-run organization.
Well, let me talk about the Yankees and all of their money and their rebuilding process, and they're playing 650 ball again. Unlike the Nationals, I mean, the Orioles are going to have stiff competition. I'm not convinced the Blue Jays are done, after seeing them sort of crawl back into this thing the last 2 weeks, as much as they buried themselves in April. This is a real catfight in the American League East, and the Yankees and the Red Sox are going to have a lot to say here over the next 6 months.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's looking like a very deep division again, and I agree with you on Toronto. I think maybe people tried to write them off a little too early. When they start getting guys back, they could be very dangerous. Josh Donaldson has barely played this year. They've got a lot of money and a lot of very good big league players on the disabled list. Including. God, their pitching staff has just been makeshift. Liriano's been out, and J.A. Happ has been out. Tulowitzki's been out. That team could get healthy and get really good really quickly. So don't write off the Blue Jays. The Yankees are fascinating, right? I mean, because they kind of had 1 foot in a rebuilding process and 1 foot in go for it mode. They trade off all these veteran guys and downsize, but then all of a sudden they sign Chapman to the biggest contract ever for a closer. So they kind of had in the back of their mind, we're sort of rebuilding here, but if we get good and we think we can, we're going to have this expensive closer to keep us in contention. So they're a fascinating case study, and the way that their young players are coming along has to be really scary for the rest of the division.
A lot of places they thought they were going to be good this year. Boston, Toronto, obviously Cleveland, the Cubs, the Rangers. These were all teams that were sort of loaded up for this year. And by and large, it's baseball. Just when you think you got 100 games won in March, you actually have to go out and play in April, right? And a lot of these teams are scuffled. I mean, the Cubs are a sub-500 team right now. It's incredible.
Yeah, it is incredible. I mean, you can pin almost all of that on starting pitching, and it's not that unusual. If you look at the Cubs and the Indians both, they played all the way into November. Their horses at the front of their rotation are all throwing 220 to 240 innings, regular season and postseason combined, and they have the shortest off season of any team, and so there's a real effect of that, and it's happened year after year in Major League Baseball. I remember the 2005 White Sox winning the World Series with these guys throwing 240, 250 innings, Mark Burley and John Garland and Jose Contreras, and the next year, they're cooked. They all regress, and you're seeing that with the Cubs, with especially Jake Arrieta now, whose ERA is up 2.5 runs from last year, looks nothing like the same guy. So, I mean, there's real concern there for the Cubs. The Indians are in a similar boat with Corey Kluber and some of the rest of their rotation who's down this year. But it's a long year, and I think that, all of those teams, including the Red Sox, who are going to get David Price back by the end of the month, you certainly do not want to count out teams like the Cubs, the Indians, and the Red Sox.
Dave Sheinin joining us here from the Washington Post. He covers all things baseball for the Post. You can also follow him at Dave Sheinin on Twitter, and he lives here in Baltimore despite covering the Washington Post. Last thing for you, Houston Astros were the team that I went dollar in last year and said they'll be a playoff team. Looks like they skipped out on me last year. They haven't skipped out on me this year. I mean, Keuchel's back. They're hitting the ball. They are the most exciting young team to watch in baseball right now.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. I think they simply underachieved to a certain extent last year. I mean, Keuchel, like you said, that was sort of symbolic of the whole year. It was almost a mystifying type of regression from him last year, and clearly that was the aberration. They are so loaded, and again, you talk about lineups, man. I mean, this is a fabulous lineup that's really stacked top to bottom, young players, dynamic players, a good mix of veterans there, guys like Brian McCann and Josh Reddick. And I just think, and they have one of those bullpen weapons in Chris Davinsky, who, is sort of a poor man's Andrew Miller, or at least a guy who doesn't get the kind of ink that Andrew Miller gets, but it's going to be, you watch them. If they get to October, Chris Davinsky, this reliever they have, is going to be a household name, and he's going to have the type of October that Andrew Miller had, and we're all going to be talking about this guy.
Well, it looks like they're going to get to October, at least for now. We'll see if the Orioles can get there. Dave, I hope to bump into you around Camden Yards for some beer and peanuts and a hot dog at some point here this summer now that you're back on the baseball beat. Always great to talk ball with you. And you enjoying it back on the baseball beat?
Oh, yeah, absolutely, man. It feels like home.
First love. There he goes. Dave Sheinin from the Washington Post. You can follow him out on Twitter as well. You can find me in the Buy a Toyota audio vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world on your mobile device by downloading the TuneIn radio app. We come in crystal clear anywhere you are on your mobile device. Of course, our morning newspaper ships to your email inbox at 7 a.m. That's all brought to you by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com, where it's still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That's all brought to you by Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here on Thursday driving you home with the SSV. That is the Sunday Sports Voice. Now heard Thursdays from 3 until 5. I'm out on Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, anywhere the internet is served, including nasty at WNST.net anytime it finds me. Our road trip's up this week. Final week for London this week. If you want to get in on that, the road trips tab is there. We also have Green Bay and Nashville, and you can always toss me an email. We're streaming live out on Facebook Live, as well as our YouTube Live. We are WNST.net, AM 1570, and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.